Hey everyone, my name is Shane, and this is my ethical case study from the area of business. The information in my presentation comes from a paper published in 2019, and it deals with the openness of big data and repositories with the applications of an ethical framework specifically focused on health and research. This is what I plan to discuss with you today. In general, the big data field is huge and has lots of gray space that applies to ethics. There is no one specific dilemma in this field, as it's all very much uncharted territory. With that being said, I could go in many different directions with this presentation, but I'll focus mostly on ethical struggles from privacy and security perspectives. My intent is to give you a bigger picture from what data repositories actually are and orient you to the big data world in general. I'll then drill down into a specific study that I analyzed from the packet of documents that I have. At this point, I should also say that my topic has nothing to do with the nefarious things in Module 5 that we just covered, data valence, data mining. It's strictly a business community problem that they're trying to get under control. Before I get into an ethical study case, I need to frame the topic and orient you to the big data repositories. No, you don't need a technical background to understand what I'm about to say or what's going on here. The bottom line is that there is a growing expectation or even a requirement for researchers to deposit their data projects into mass storage locations. Those are called data repositories. This is usually more than an expectation. It's actually a condition of research and funding. It specifically also applies to the publication priorities that are given to the researchers themselves. Ideally, the storage of data in a repository also ensures proper cataloging and ensures long-term availability beyond the end of the respective project. This leads to the fair data principles and how they reflect on big data communities. They expect the information to be populated in a repository in such a way that it's not just for human access and understanding. It also deals with the interoperability of machine to machine. Not all repositories are the same. They differ in terms of who controls the data, as well as the actual data format within the repository. Different repositories are institutional, government, discipline-specific, generalistic, and project program data. Each of these types comes with their own little ecosystems and bureaucracies attached. When it comes to the world of big data, there's no shortage of issues. Researchers are under constant pressure to conform to data practices. The pressure comes from peers, but the system itself is actually incentivized towards researchers to push their data into the repositories, to share more. The common incentives are funding and publishing priorities. This means that the publishers give favor to the studies when it meets their specific accountability guidelines. So jumping into the case study details, the situation looks like this. Dr. A works for the university hospital. He's going to conduct a 2-year study on drug-resistant bacteria living in the adult sections of the inpatient areas of the hospital. His study has 2,000 patients. Dr. A obtained informed consent from each patient. The university will be the long-term data owner and the storefront for other researchers to obtain the data for reuse in later studies. And here's information collected by Dr. A during his study. The case study outlines specific dynamics and relationships among the stakeholders involved in the narrative. This slide shows a summary of those relationships and how they're ultimately connected. The patients are specifically listed to have their own individual understanding of the implied consent form given to them by Dr. A. This means that there's variability in what each patient believes will happen to their data. The university has several angles playing out. They're listed as being academically neutral and intentionally have no formal data policies or storage templates for the researchers to file the data from their projects. They acknowledge their technical obligations to protect the patient data, but are also concerned with the long-term operating costs of the data repositories and the servers. They're also on board with the FAIR principles meaning they acknowledge that the data needs to be accessible and interoperable and have a certain framework applied to it when they're stored. And lastly, the university is concerned with their reputations of being a research facility. Dr. A is listed being concerned with obtaining quality data and wishes to get proper credit for his work. He is also said to be concerned with proper balance between publishing raw patient data information and the rolled up summary aggregate data. The IRB, the Institutional Review Board, plays a patient protection role in the scenario. There's listed primarily concerned with minimizing patient harms. There isn't much else listed on what that actually means, so there's some leeway in that area. The last two dynamics are interesting, and they're intended to pit against each other. The funder of the study encourages open data sharing to promote more research, but the publisher mandates raw data clearly they value accountability over anything else. Because the topic of big data is so large and there are so many variables to contend with, the authors of my case study never truly give the so what or the final answer punchline in their documents. In this way, the ethical dilemmas raised by the paper are not ever resolved. The authors simply evaluate from different angles of their topics and give a deeper appreciation of the ethical issues. In this way, this slide represents what they think the key factors are involved in the scenario that I've outlined. On the left side, they give thoughts on attributes such as autonomy and liberty, listing insights such as a patient can only be respected if they're allowed to control their own data once it's inside the repository. This is a pretty unrealistic stance from a researcher's perspective, but is accurate from an ethical point of view. But again, the authors never fully give a final position. Rather, they give a long list of menu options for the community to consider. To me, the authors come off as admiring the problem, and that is actually not adequate enough for me. But as the rubric states, this dilemma is a situation where no matter what actions are taken, there's a stakeholder making a compromise. Because the authors of my case study paper didn't satisfy my personal curiosities on the ethics of big data repositories, I did some more digging on the topic and tried to apply some theories we've learned in the course. This slide represents my personal thoughts on how I believe ethical theories apply to the world of research repositories. For the most part, I recognize that there's a tug-of-war happening here. On one side, you have the patients. The other side, you have researchers. Patients want maximum privacy, and the researchers want more unfiltered data to feed their causes and future research. In this way, I believe 3 major theories apply to the patient's side and 4 theories fit clearly on the researcher side. On the patient side, I believe deontology, virtual ethics, and justice and fairness apply. From a deontology perspective, the patients could have a universal and consistent duty to support scientific research, plain and simple. Virtual ethics suggests that they should be intimately honest with researchers when they participate, meaning don't lie, be a virtuous person. The patients could also see things from a justice and fairness perspective, meaning they consider society's impacts over themselves and actually be proactive to seek out studies to participate in, not just the ones that they're approached by. On the researcher side, I believe the theories of deontology, virtue ethics, right-based, and justice and fairness also apply. A deontology researcher should act in a way that respects the dignity of the patients with no exceptions. I believe the virtuous researcher would practice transparency with his or her data as well as using the utmost integrity when ensuring the de-identity and the re-identity methods are used to protect their patients. From a rights-based perspective, the researchers should prioritize the safeguarding of the patient data as well as ensuring informed consent forms are well understood by each patient. go above and beyond to understand. And finally, the justice and fairness on the researcher side would adhere to the FAIR principles and ensure data is accessible to all, as well as minimally processed to ensure biases aren't introduced to the data. These are my references, and this completes my presentation. Thank you for listening and watching. I look forward to your feedback.